I've been doing events and supporting the arts sector for over 20 years here in Ottawa. I work with an organization called Music Art People, and we do events around town, spotlight different artists who are making waves in our community. It's so important to come together with community and collaborate. It's just, there's so many amazing organizations and individuals who are doing great work here in Ottawa. So it's important to come together for knowledge sharing, to share inspiration, but also to share tools and techniques of what's working for them, so we can collaborate on making this the most creative place on the planet.
A thing I found interesting when talking about funding is the way myself as a, genderqueer Muslim woman of color in hip hop, which is already a marginalized art form within the realm of arts, we have to compete with these organizations who say that they want to serve our communities, which, thank you, but we are already doing that. We're just competing for the same funds. I've worked in the federal government on a strategic finance team. I see how their grants work and how little they need to fight for it comparatively, whereas artists were competing with each other in this tight budget.
So let me give you some data on trust and institutions. Trust in all civil society organizations is declining. And those civil society organizations are defined as, naturally, government, but also business, media, and yes, the not-for-profit sector. There is a crisis of grievance. So what they're saying is that people are feeling so aggrieved about the state of the world, if you like, that their trust in particularly business and business leaders, because they see the rich getting richer, but also against these other organizations, public sector, media, and NGOs. So look, why does this all matter? Because civil society is made up of these institutions, private, public, media, and NGOs, and all of us who work in them to try to make things better and make things happen. So when trust goes down, the legitimacy of our capacity to do things diminishes. So what are some of the drivers? Well, one would be, I would argue, I think, the rapid pace of change. Another, thinking of a recent book by a former clerk of the Privy Council, Alex Humafarb, would argue that neoliberalism has failed. The spending power of the middle and lower classes has probably not changed much since the 1970s, if you can imagine. But of course, the rich are getting richer. Ergo, crisis of grievance. And there's a package around, in my view, maybe that's just because of my work with the CBC, but a package around where people are getting information and how that affects them. So it is no secret, and the data will tell you, that more and more people are getting their news from social media feeds rather than from mediated organizations such as when I was working at the CBC. And it's very, very hard to determine what is true. And then on top of that, we only go to the feeds that we are sympathetic with. So either, obviously in a political world, right and left. And so we're not open to other views. The fear at the federal level, for what it's worth, that the public service is no longer fit for service. I've been doing a series of interviews with deputy ministers, and one of them gave me the quote, "The public service is not responding to the world it faces." So overall, I guess what I'm trying to suggest to you is our public institutions are at some risk, driven in part by a declining lack of trust and these other factors such as the lack of evidence-based decision-making and the like. A StatCan 2023 survey says that over 40% of the not-for-profits are finding they have to do more, and essentially that 25% are doing it with less, if you see what I mean. They don't have the resources in order to do it. So again, at the end of the day, my message to you is prepare for an uncertain future, be adaptable, be resilient, and look for changing circumstances. And at the end of the day, I would argue if you can get there and be in the right place, this will ensure your relevance to your community and at the end of the day, help build trust in the institution.
So my name's Vanessa von Heidebeck. I have been working in the arts for about 20 years, mostly internationally in Berlin and in London. I think the power of co-creation and the impact thinking about things locally can have on a global scale, and how global shifts can have effect on local communities, and how we match those two together, and how working collaboratively can really solve a lot of those issues.
The speakers today, they really hit strong marks and necessary marks of where the artists or the arts organizations, but the sector overall really needs to be thinking. There was that sense of urgency, that sense of adaptability, and be prepared. So a preparedness, which I found was really, really critical, just in where we are geopolitically in the world. But this, again, space and time, I was talking about the catalytic. Yeah, it's really important to have that sense of urgency, I think is important.
There are ways, right, to move through this time with a little bit of hope and some really targeted strategies. What I want to talk about is really what do we mean when we're talking about public policy, advocacy, and the L word, lobbying, right? Because I think if I asked you guys, how many of you consider yourselves to be active advocates for the arts or other social justice causes in your communities? How many of you, getting a little bit of this, how many of you are active or have been active in public policy in some way? Whether that's municipal, with your local counselor. Okay, so again, yeah, and as I say it, people kind of think, okay, yeah, maybe I have done that. I think it's really important to name some terms when we talk about especially what the arts will be for, what the role will be for Arts Ottawa. When we talk about public policy, those are generally the tools that governments use, and I would say also other entities, but mainly governments use in order to achieve their objectives, right, for the public. So these can be laws, they can be regulations, they can be direct funding programs and supports, they can be executive orders, as we're seeing in the south of us. But there's a whole suite of different things that governments can do to achieve particular outcomes. And that policy process happens all the time, right? There's no moment where government does policy and then they sit back and they don't do it anymore. But there's cycles to it. And we're in one of those moments where we can really see where we are in a cycle federally. At the same time as that, we have moments in that cycle that are open because of those transitions, right? So when there's an election, there are platforms. When there's a new cabinet named, there are new people coming into those jobs who are getting briefed for the first time on what it is they should care about, including the ministers for heritage, culture, communications, and anything that relates to what our objectives as a community may be. But I would say equally important is the engagement outside of those moments. And I think that's true for public policy making and trying to make sure that what we do in the arts is part of the conversation, not just for policies that are about us, but policies to which we can contribute, right? And again, I think if anyone in this room was to talk about what's the reason you do what you do, right? You're going to talk about the art making, you're going to talk about that experience, and you're also going to talk about what it does for your communities, for youth, for where you live, for a particular issue that you're engaged in through your art, right? There's always something else that is being expressed or contributed to through a work of art. The next term is advocacy. And I would say advocacy for me generally refers to taking a position, right? And taking a role as an educator or a promoter of that position in an issue, right? So you're out there, you're talking about what you do. I've been all buttoned up today because we're talking about advocacy. Read Canadian books, I Heart Culture, Culture Days, The Way to My Heart is Art, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts is that one, right? So it's taking a position that there's a particular good in what you're bringing forward and advocating for that over time. That's a bit different from lobbying. But lobbying is really when you're directly engaging with an elected official, generally, in order to influence their decision on a particular issue, right? So you're coming in and you're saying something like, we cannot lose the cultural exemption in the North American Free Trade Agreement known as CUSMA now, right? Which is going to be something we're going to have to advocate for and lobby for, I suspect, in this environment. So the question for Arts Ottawa is, one of them, what's the role, right? Are we talking about engagement with public policy over the cycle of public policy, which is, as I said, sort of a constant cycle? Are we talking about advocacy and playing that kind of voice of the community role. I mean, that's pretty obvious. Generally, everyone in the room would nod and say, yes, this is a role for Arts Ottawa. And then the question about lobbying, right? And in answering each one of those questions, every single person that you're talking to in any political party, whether they're in power or not, running or not, is a human being who has some kind of connection to what we do. Every single one. We just have to find it. And even if you can't find it, every single person there wants to be welcomed with empathy and understanding, right? And so asking a simple question like, this seems like it was probably a really busy day for you. How much time do we have? You know, how can we make this time work for you at the beginning of a meeting? Will often cause an elected official to just kind of like reset, right? Because they don't get asked that question very much. You want to be the nicest meeting in the day and the clearest at the same time. And you want to have enough contact with these folks that they remember you when you come back, right? You got to find the meaningful connection in a clear way. The opportunity for Arts Ottawa is how do you build relationships in this community, which does include the feds, right, in a way that is going to be meaningful over time.
It's interesting that the arts and culture community in this city has never, ever, not like Toronto or Montreal, where it is front and center with politicians. In this city, it's not. My name's John David Powell, JD for short. I'm a visual artist, and I'm also an instructor at the Ottawa School of Art. It's interesting because there's so many levels of authority in this city that it's important that if you're going to be one unit, one sounding board, I guess, for the politicians, if they're thinking of getting money, then it's important that we all are on the same page. So a meeting like this or a get-together is very important. It's a multi-jurisdictional city. You have to get 10 approvals to do a mural on, God forbid it's a heritage building, to sort of just understand the way things are. I mean, I have a fairly good understanding of the way the city works.
So for me, I'll directly talk about boards. and building on Toby and Kelly, I think with the expected changes, board plays a very important role in an organization. And to a large extent, change can come with some challenges. And I will talk specifically to an example of Social Planning Council of Ottawa. Up until 2021, Social Planning Council of Ottawa, about 40 or 35% of our budget used to come from United Way. And I know pretty much all of you here knows about United Way. And 2021, we received a message that the funding priorities of United Way are changing, and therefore, the funding that is coming to SPC is also going to change. And we thought, yeah, maybe it's a couple $10,000 or so. But 2022, and because that was pretty much included in SPC budget over years, it almost made the board and the leadership of the organization to presume we may receive some changes, but not that big much of a difference. But 2022, the news came, and it was almost a 90% cut. Now with that cutting of funding, pretty much that change that Toby was talking about, caused the organization to shook a little bit. And that's how I'm bringing out the conversation about the board and how board really plays an important role in the governance of the organization. When the change comes, just like how changes bring to institutions, it brought confusion. I started attending the board meetings, and the conversations that we are having at the board, it's how we're going to close Social Planning Council of Ottawa. This is an organization that was started in 1928, and it has massive programming in the city. Massive things are happening. But the conversation happening at the board week after week was how are we going to successfully close Social Planning Council of Ottawa. And I was only 8 months in the organization. 60% of the board were there for 8 or 7 years, and they're describing changes in the past and how we're going to recover from this and whatnot. And what stood out to me was a lack of consideration to the programs and the people that we were serving. We're running a grant contribution with the federal government, providing paid subsidy training for young folks. And the project was in the middle. We were on the 2 years or 5 years project. And they're having this conversation of closing, perhaps returning the remaining piece of the funding to the federal government and see how we can responsibly close up all the activities and closing the organization. And that really sparked my brain, that we are here having this conversation for 6 weeks and none or no one from the board ever mentioned what happened to the people that are benefiting from the Social Planning Council of Ottawa. We're supporting a network of seniors that includes 6,000 ethnocultural seniors. These are seniors who don't either speak English or French. And in that conversation, only one board member stood and said, oh, with Social Planning Council of Ottawa closing, then maybe the seniors, we can find a way to move them to Council on Aging so that they can get the services there. But mind you, this program was created because of the services gap that were existing within the sector. And we got some funding from the federal government. And when I came back and said, okay, we've gotten some funding to cover the United Way law, how are we changing things around from here now? How do we change now from the conversation of closing up to conversation of how do we strategize and change, maybe adapt on how we're delivering our mission? That's when the conversation changed. And when it changed, that's when I saw, okay, this is an opportunity of influencing how our governance is structured. And our 2023 AGM, we introduced a shared governance conversation. And now every conversation at the board regarding to a change in the organization, a change in conversation, has to take place with some members who are beneficiaries of those programs. With the new changes, it's pretty much can become a little bit hard to even think of shared governance, because now almost everyone is thinking on how they will survive in the next few years. And now if an organization serves perhaps low-income individuals or artists for this example, when you start thinking, okay, how do we include even struggling artists, not just well-off artists, even those who have not breakthrough, those who are living through the margins, if you start to have this conversation of how do we include them, playing devil advocates here, the question will always be, how are we going to sustain this organization with someone with zero contacts? And we all know board play a role in advocacy, in fundraising, in other strategic decision-making of the organization. But now if you started having a conversation of having inexperienced people on the board, or people who don't have financial or monetary contribution to the organization, then that will always find someone who will say, I don't think this is a good idea. Finding ways to include everyone at the board level, that will always be a challenge for organizations. You have to create a way to encourage the folks that you want to have on your board to be involved on the board. We have low-income individuals, senior individuals, and also youth representatives on our board now, and some of our committees. And the challenge on the recruitment process in the beginning was none of them applied. And the reason being, either they're working through 3 jobs, or they're working through a lot of things in their life, or someone has a child in their house and they're telling them, come and join the board. Who takes care of the board of the child? And your meetings are almost in the afternoons. So finding ways to include structures and infrastructure on supporting those people, on reaching out to those people. When you put, it's not just about putting a job advertisement on social media or sending a blast email, but also doing one-on-one reaching out and encouraging them to apply. Given the changes that are coming, it's very, very important that the people that we are serving are also involved in the decision making.
We need to have the understanding that arts and culture is part of our fabric of being. It's not this separate thing that we need extra money for, rather than these colonial systems that we think we need. We don't need them. We can grow and exist our ways of collaboration, our ways of holding space and listening to each other and knowing what each other need and honoring each other. It's like, to me, it's that simple. Our job is not to seek out love, but to seek out those barriers that prevent us from it and remove them.
I'm so grateful to have the contribution of my colleagues up here, because I just kept thinking in my head what all of you have brought to the conversation, except maybe for Reuben for a lot of extent, is placed within the colonial structure of serving colonial or European descendant people, not necessarily serving those of us who are equity deserving, and especially not serving Indigenous peoples. And so when you talk about, change is coming, it's going to be abrupt, you've got to be ready for it. And it's like, great, so that little piece of pie that we've been fighting for 400 years is now that big. So it's a very different mindset to think about all of the structures that Indigenous peoples in general are up against. And the first thing that I want to say to you, and especially as you're restructuring your policies and your councils and your committees, language is so important, and the language you use. Even something as simple as in the case study, I saw a reference to high level. That's a hierarchical reference. So you're right away assuming that somebody is now going to dictate down a direction. Something like that is very disruptive to those of us who think equitably and on the same plane. We work in circle. So keeping that language in the back of your mind, something as simple as those disjunctive words that are actually exclusive at their core, is one thing to really keep attention to in all you do. And right now, especially policymakers, rethinking the language and understanding how colonially exclusive it is critical, because I can guarantee it is. The next thing is membership. And so for our organization, Lodgepole Arts Alliance, we have created and come back to a traditional model of the Iroquois Confederacy Council. We operate out of Kingston, Gadaraqwe, and Goweno-Gweski, Goweno-Day, which is where I live, which is Wolf Island. So we are down on our original territory. I'm home. This is, it's shared territory with our northern neighbors, our Algonquin, Anishinaabe neighbors. So we have to recognize and continue to bring back, as we design our governance structure, as we design our policies, because we are a brand new organization. We don't have a legacy to status quo live up to. I hate that when somebody goes, we've been doing this for so long. I'm going, that's exactly why we need to change it, because look at who you're excluding and who you've excluded for that long. And so as we create this, we are going back to who our ancestors were. This is an entirely Indigenous-focused organization. We have only an Indigenous Grand Council. We have an Indigenous membership internal circle of artists, people who just love our vision, people who are coming from different sectors of the cultural sphere. But then we also have an outer circle, including our treaty partners. There is not an Indigenous arts cultural space hub that is owned, operated, programmed, and designed, built anywhere in the world. So there's spaces on reserves, but they're occupying colonially built buildings. There are spaces off reserve, but they're operating colonial built buildings. To find a space from the ground up that Indigenous folks can interweave their designs of thought and safety and cultural identification and wisdom has never happened. So this is our vision, and this I think is why Annalie wanted me to come in to talk to you a little bit about our operational processes and how we do it. And so we get back to having that Grand Council, but that Grand Council is entirely fed by 4 bundles. We have 4 bundles that operate outside the Grand Council. We have one of our Grand Council members who also sits in those 4 bundle cycles, and they are Clay, which is a land-based bundle. We have Smoke, which is a communication-based bundle. We have Bark, which is our programming and events-based bundle. And then we have a wampum, which is our pouch for finances. Again, language. Because when you think about chair, that's also, again, identifying someone who's probably sitting higher than you. If you think about treasurer, is money treasure? Is that really what it's meant to be? We have the feather holder is the person who will take it. And we operate in a way where we change that up depending on the comfort zone and people's abilities, capacity, human capacity, because all these people, yes, they work. We have the carrier of understanding, secretary, the person who takes that information. And then we have, the pouch holder, who is our treasurer. Over time, you're actually creating a level playing field for people to not feel that they're stuck in this hierarchy of delegation and or the lack of trust. Because you're trying to build trust to be able to then grow a community that operates together. It's about understanding relationships and working to have a trust that everybody is of a good mind and of one mind. I'll leave you with, one final quote. The Grand Council is seen as the mentors of the people, and they shall be mentors of the people for all time. The thickness of their skin shall be 7 spans, which is to say that they shall be proof against anger, offensive action, and criticism. Their hearts shall be full of peace and goodwill, and their minds filled with a yearning for the welfare of the people of all their confederacy. Community, your arts community. You're looking out for them.
I come back to the perhaps 2 words to think about. One is adaptability. We can plan for a certain world, outcome, environment, which would lead me to my second word, which would be complacency.
What we're talking about is a new way of working, right? Shared governance, working in an entirely new way in policy and advocacy, recognizing, Terri-Lynn, from the very beginning that everything we do and fund and support in this country in the arts and cultural sector is from a colonial model. The opportunity right now, I think, for this organization in this moment is to do it differently.
If the sector is divided that way, then it gives a room for the multi-agencies to see a space on how to manipulate the system. But if you can bring out something that is common in all the agencies, then the likelihood of bringing them on the table. But, and like I'm saying, in the arts sector, it's not too late.
This system was created specifically to do that. It's a divide and conquer system. That is the colonial model that's been around for 1,000 years. And so it doesn't mean, though, that we have to conform to it. We can rewrite that system.
For you to get a dime out of the city, you pretty much have to put your soul on it. The only thing you get is 1,500 for the festival. Other than that, all the other funding, you never get it. But having an artist who is supposed to have a full-time job at McDonald's or somewhere and still have the time to participate in art, you're calling for a meeting when they have a shift, good luck if they will even show up. So it's a matter of finding out how best can we decentralize our governance or our council so that we are creating opportunities. If someone is missing a shift at work, how are we compensating that? If someone is not going to attend their work, how do we create a meaningful in the engagement in art? When we start to show value in art, that's how you'll attract people in Ottawa or local artists.